to welcome Kaylin Smith. She's a water resource control engineer for the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Thank you very much for being here today to speak with our members.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. It's nice to meet all of you. I'm a relatively new hire to the program, so I haven't had that much of an opportunity to meet with the different growers in the area yet, so I'm really excited to be able to meet some of you today. I have a presentation for you guys. Let me share my screen. Please let me know when you can see it. Can everyone see my screen?
We can see it.
Okay. So I will be giving you guys a brief, well, not a brief, an overview of the ag order and what you need to know. I am here at my apartment in San Diego, and so my dog might growl or bark if someone walks by. I apologize in advance if she does. Please just ignore her. I am on the call today with my supervisor, Ben Neal. He and I will both be here to answer any questions you guys may have at the end of the meeting. Please hold your questions until the end. We have a large presentation to get through. So let's just get started. Okay. Okay, I think it changed slides. So I just want to begin the presentation by going over a brief history of why ag is regulated. The growers that I've talked to on the phone, some of them have expressed confusion as to why there is regulation for the ag program now. So I just wanted to go over a brief history of why it is. So we have two laws that we use that give us the authority to regulate agriculture and water quality. Those two are the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act of 1969, which is a state law, and the Clean Water Act of 1972, which is a federal law. So the Porter-Cologne Act is the act that established the water boards. It accounts for both point and non-point source pollution, and it accounts for both discharges to surface water and to groundwaters. Point source pollution would be something like people discharging oil into a river, which can then lead to the river catching fire, as you can see in this picture here to the right of the screen. Non-point source discharges cover like the agricultural discharges. In the past, those were covered by waste discharge requirements, and now we have the ag order for non-point source discharges. The Porter-Cologne Act also led to the creation of the Basin Plan, which is otherwise known as the Water Quality Control Plan for the San Diego Basin. We use Basin Plan as the shorthand. And within the Basin Plan are these things called the water quality objectives, which I will discuss more in the next slides. The Clean Water Act, like I mentioned before, is the principal federal statute. It's the main federal law to protect water quality. Some of the aspects of this that I want to mention are that the Clean Water Act requires states to list which water bodies are not meeting the standards that are set. So in the Clean Water Act, there's this list called the 303D list, and on that list is all of the impaired water bodies in the state. And for impaired waters, the state must set what's called total maximum daily loads for those water bodies. So that basically means that if a water body is impaired for nutrients, for example, then the state will set what are essentially limits on how much of those nutrients can be discharged into that water body. And those are what's known as like the loading into the impaired water bodies. So now these are the laws that give us the authority to regulate agriculture. I just want to bring up some examples of the effects of what we focus on, nitrogen and phosphorus, on water bodies in the state. So if you discharge enough nitrogen and phosphorus into a surface water body, for example, you can cause something that's known as eutrophication. So you use nitrate in your fertilizer to help your plants grow, but if that fertilizer, that nitrate then gets into a surface water body, it will help the plants grow in that body of water as well. And if that's algae, it can lead to algal blooms, which can then lead to eutrophication. So the algal blooms can cover the entire surface of the water body, making it look green. And green's my favorite color, but not when it's covering the water like this. And so when it covers the water body like this, it makes it to where sunlight cannot penetrate all the way down into the depths of the water body. So plants that are underneath the surface of the water won't be able to get sunlight, so then those plants will die. And when the algae dies, it releases a toxin and takes up all of the dissolved oxygen in the water. So then any fish that are in the water could also die. Other plants can die. So basically, eutrophication just completely destroys the ecosystem of the water body. And if nitrate gets into drinking water that we drink as humans, it can lead to something known as blue baby syndrome, the scientific name for which is methemoglobinemia. And this basically, the nitrate would act as like a oxygen inhibitor. So it doesn't let your red blood cells take in oxygen. So then your heart has to work overtime to pump blood throughout your body so that you can get oxygen to your organs. And if you're not getting those oxygen to your organs can start to fail. And it's called blue baby syndrome because it affects babies the most and the earliest. And it can lead to your skin developing this blue tint because you're basically asphyxiating because you can't get enough oxygen throughout your body. So it's not just that nitrogen and phosphorus can affect, the environment, but it can also affect human health as well. So we use, the Porter Cologne Act and the the Clean Water Act to give us our regulatory power to monitor our water so that we can make sure that it's clean and it can be used to benefit the environment and not harm human health. These are some of the water quality objectives that I spoke about earlier. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, but this specific table, it comes from the Basin Plan, as I spoke about before. It comes from Chapter 3 of the Basin Plan. I have a link to the Basin Plan, to this specific chapter at the end of the presentation. So if you are curious, you can click on that link and you can go to these tables which show the water quality objectives for the different hydrologic units in San Diego. So you can go to the table that has the specific hydrologic area that your agricultural operation is in, and you can look at what the water quality objectives are for different constituents in your area. So for example, if you're in the San Diego hydrologic unit, you can look at this table to see what the water quality objectives are for surface water, specifically in this example, for total dissolved solids. And you can see that it's 1,000 or 1,500 or maybe 300, depending on which area you're in. There are also tables for groundwater water quality objectives, if you want to see what the objectives are for groundwater in your area. I would like to point out that for nitrogen and phosphorus, it has this letter A in the column. And so if you go to this note here for note A, it says that the total phosphorus concentration shall not exceed 0.05 milligrams per liter at a stream where it enters a standing body of water. And then in that standing body of water itself, the total phosphorus concentration cannot exceed 0.025 milligrams per liter. And then in a flowing body of water, it says that the desired goal in order to prevent plant nuisances in streams and other flowing water bodies appears to be 0.1 milligrams per liter total phosphorus. So in any kind of creek or river, we don't want the total phosphorus concentration to exceed 0.1 milligrams per liter total phosphorus. And then we use this ratio down here, N to P equals 10 to 1, to get our total nitrogen limit. And so in a river, the total phosphorus is 0.1 milligrams per liter. So for nitrogen, it's 1 milligram per liter. And that's where we get our limits for, and those are the limits that we use for determining whether or not a water body is meeting its water quality objectives. So go to the next slide. And I want to talk about what specifically there is our order and what you do or what you need to do in order to maintain compliance with the order. I also will go over what the third party group does on your behalf. But to start it all off, I just want to talk about kind of what the order is and what we at the Water Board are responsible for. So we regulate agriculture under the General Agricultural Order. There are two of them, actually. The one relevant to you guys is order number R9 2016-0004, because that's the third party general order. The other order we have is for agricultural growers who enroll as individuals, whereas this is for the growers that enroll in part of a third party group. So this order was adopted by the San Diego Water Board on November 9th, 2016. So it's relatively new as a program. But it also means that it's actually coming up time for the order to be reopened again. So some of our responsibilities under the order as it currently stands is that we are responsible for tracking enrollment. So when you guys submit your notices of intent to your third party group, they then give those notices of intent to us, and we review them to make sure that they are complete and that you are including all of the documents and information that we need. And once we approve it, then you guys are covered under the third party general order. If you sell your property or you're just not farming anymore, you can then fill out a notice of termination, which we also review. And if we can verify your reason for termination, then we approve it and we get you out of the ag order. So then you no longer have coverage to discharge from an agricultural operation. If you decide after you submit your notice of intent that you are going to keep farming or that you're going to farm again, then you need to give us another notice of intent to let us know that you are farming again, because once your notice of termination is accepted, you no longer have coverage under the ag order. So you need to get coverage again if you're planning on discharging again. A large part of what we do involves coordination with third-party groups. As I mentioned before, your NOIs and NOTs come to us from your third-party group. We also send out directive letters to get people to enroll if they aren't enrolling under their own initiative. And we let the third party group in that area know that we are sending out a directive letter to that grower. So then the third party group can also contact them to try to get them to join the group and help them through the enrollment process. We also inspect the agricultural facilities of the growers who are members of the third party groups and enrolled in our order. We couldn't inspect any facilities for a while due to COVID. And then we had some staff turnover. Like I said, I'm relatively new to the program. I only started working here in November, started going out on inspections in March. So we are going to be inspecting facilities from here on out. I will call ahead to schedule an inspection. I'm not just going to drop by on you guys unannounced. But I am going to be scheduling the inspections, prioritizing the facilities that are closest to impaired water bodies. So the San Diego Regional Irrigated Lands Group has about 1,200 members, which is a lot. And since I'm going to be prioritizing the members who are closest to impaired water bodies, it might take a while for me to get out to your facility, but I will be going through them all. So you can look forward to having me there. If you have any questions about that, you can feel free to ask me. But like I said, I won't be dropping by unannounced. I will be scheduling them ahead of time. Another thing that the San Diego Water Board does is that we start enforcement on violations. So if I go out to inspect your property and I notice that you're discharging right into a creek, then that could be a cause for enforcement. I could write a notice of violation and start giving out monetary penalties or starting that process if you don't respond and fix the discharge and the problem. We also send out NOVs for people who aren't enrolling and are unresponsive. Not that you guys have to worry about any of that because you're already enrolled and are members of a third party group. But yeah, that's what we do, or some of what we do. Now to move on to what you, the grower, are responsible for under the third party general order. The biggest thing, kind of obvious, is to comply with the discharge prohibitions and discharge specifications identified in the general order, which is just a fancy way of saying not to discharge anything into the surface of the groundwater that would impact the health of either people or the environment. So some examples are to not discharge any hazardous waste or any oil, no trash or solid waste into surface water. You also don't want to be discharging any fertilizers or fumigants or pesticides into groundwater wells. You don't want to be discharging anything that will cause erosion or that will affect the taste or the odor of the water. You don't want to be changing the pH of the water too much. You don't want to be discharging any chemicals or anything that will cause eutrophication, like I spoke about earlier, that will affect not only the aesthetic of the water body, but also the health of it, and lead to plant and animal death. You should have a copy of the third-party general order. And if you don't, I do have a link at the end of this presentation so you can access it. And you could go and read more in depth on the discharge prohibitions and specifications if you want. It's right at the beginning of the document. But like I said, generally speaking, it's just make sure you're not discharging anything into a surface or groundwater that can affect human health or environmental health. That's the biggest responsibility you guys have, is to make sure you're taking care of your discharge and discharging responsibly.
Can my computer talk, Anton?
Sorry about that.
Can my computer talk?
I don't know who that is, but yeah, thank you. I was going to ask to mute them. Okay, so another thing that you guys are responsible for is preparing what's known as a water quality protection plan. Now, a water quality protection plan is required when you submit your notice of intent. So we basically look it over to make sure it is complete. And so your water quality protection plan basically includes like your contact information of like who the owner and operators are, what their contact information is, contact information for the third party group. It includes the information on all the parcels of land that you have in your operation. It includes like your some of your best management practices, what pesticides you use, what fertilizers you use, what plants you're growing. It also includes like a site map so we can see the boundaries of your facility or facilities if you have many. We can see where the water flows on your property, information like that, so we can know, even without going there, kind of how your property and your facility functions. Another one of your responsibilities is to complete the quarterly self-inspections and annual self-assessments. So these exist so you can go around your property and to make sure that everything is functioning the way you want it to be, that your irrigation system is working the way you want it to be, that your best management practices that you're using on your facility are working the way you want it to be. And if something isn't to your satisfaction and you decide to change it, whether that's your irrigation system or anything else, you're supposed to update your water quality protection plan. The water quality protection plan is an iterative document, so you are supposed to update it as you make changes to how you run your facility. And a good way to decide if you're going to make those changes is when you are completing your quarterly self-inspections and annual self-assessments. So please make sure you're doing those. And then if you do decide to make a change to how you're operating your facility, that you are going back and updating your water quality protection plan so that we can look at the document and see what you're doing without actually having to go out there, because like I said, there's 1,200 of you guys. So it's just going to take a long time to get through all of you. So having an up-to-date water quality protection plan on our records is a good way for us to keep track of what you're doing, even though there's so many of you. So now moving on to what the San Diego Region Irrigated Lands Group is responsible for under the third-party general order. Some of the responsibilities include preparing and submitting annual summaries of fees and revenue, which is important. If you guys don't pay your fees and don't do what your third-party group requires of you, they could drop you. And if they drop you from the group, then you no longer have coverage under the third-party general order. You can't have coverage under that order if you're not part of a third-party group. So then you are discharging without any coverage, so then you could be liable to receive monetary penalties. So you would either have to enroll as an individual or join another group. So make sure you're paying your fees on time. Another responsibility for the third-party group is to provide you members with all correspondence, plans, and reports you need, as well as any other information related to the third-party general order to answer any of your questions and to let you know like what you can and cannot do, what you should and should not be doing. Another responsibility of theirs is to prepare a water quality restoration plan when it's needed. And I will be going over what a water quality restoration plan is and what triggers it on the next slide. The next responsibility of theirs that I want to mention is that they have to prepare a surface water and a groundwater monitoring program plan. And this is a big one. If you guys ever decide or start to think about maybe joining or going to enroll as an individual instead of being a part of the third-party group, you should know that as an individual, you are responsible for preparing a surface water and groundwater monitoring program plan for yourself. Right now, the third-party group does it on your behalf and does it for you. They do the monitoring for you. And the cost for the monitoring is split between all of the members. And as an individual, you would have to do that cost yourself. So another thing that the third-party group does is they submit annual reports to us. So they submit to us an annual monitoring report so that we can look at the monitoring results of the surface water and the groundwater in their area. And they also submit membership reports so we can see how many members they have and what information of the members are, like how many acreages, for example, that they have under their belt. So this is some of the responsibilities that the San Diego group does and has on your behalf. So I want to reiterate that the surface water and the groundwater monitoring is done by the group for you. But if you ever decide to go individual, you are responsible for doing your own monitoring. So now I want to go over what a water quality restoration plan is and how it affects you guys. So what a water quality restoration plan is, it's a report or a plan basically that the third-party group prepares that they prepare based off of their monitoring results. So if they are monitoring and their monitoring shows that there is a specific constituent, say total nitrogen, for example, that is consistently measuring above its water quality objective, which is 1 milligram per liter, then they have to prepare a plan to basically address how they are going to lower the total nitrogen concentration so that it's meeting its water quality objective. So a water quality restoration plan is triggered by the exceedances of these water quality benchmarks. And in order to meet this requirement, it has to exceed the benchmarks 3 out of 4 times. So we require monitoring twice a year, once during the dry season and once during the wet season. So it will take a minimum of 2 years for a sampling location to trigger the need for a WQRP. So a water quality restoration plan must include all of the constituents and all of the sampling locations that meet this criteria of having 3 out of 4 exceedances of the water quality benchmark. So for example, this picture comes directly from the water quality restoration plan that was submitted by the San Diego group. So if, for example, these little blue dots are the sampling locations, if we just focus on MC-3A, that's one location. Say at this location, sulfates and total nitrogen and ammonia all had 3 out of 4 of their sampling for those constituents exceeded the water quality benchmarks, then at this location, they would have, the San Diego group would have to say, okay, at this location, these constituents exceeded the benchmarks. This is what we are going to do in order to address that issue and lead to these constituents meeting the quality objectives. So as it currently stands, the WQRP affects 554 of the approximately 1,200 members of the San Diego group. But even if it doesn't affect you now, it might affect you in the future because, like I said, we need a minimum of 4 sampling measurements and 3 of those have to exceed the water quality benchmarks in order to trigger a WQRP. So for some of the sampling locations, there just hasn't been enough data collected to trigger the WQRP. But once they do have enough measurements, it might trigger it and it would just start to affect more and more members in more and more areas where there's the sampling. So currently what the San Diego group has proposed to do in order to address the exceedances is that they are going to implement best management practices that are focused on education. So if you're one of the 554 members that are in the affected area, so that would be the red shapes on this figure, for example, if your facility is in that red, then you need to implement basically the BMPs proposed by the San Diego group. So in this case, since it's education, it would be attending the educational webinar that they're going to put on. And it would also be reading the BMP packet that they sent out. So the BMP packet, the San Diego group sent out to every grower, not just the 554 that were affected. They just sent it out to everyone. So I'm going to be talking about some best management practices you can use later on in the presentation, but I'm only going to talk about a few of them, and this packet is like 19 pages, so you can read it, and there's a lot of BMPs in there that you could potentially use on your facility to make sure that you're not discharging anything that you're not supposed to, you know, being compliant with those discharge prohibitions and discharge specifications I brought up earlier. So regardless of whether or not you're one of those 554 right now, I would highly recommend attending that webinar and reading the packet, because like I said before, once more sampling data has been collected, the water quality restoration plan is probably going to be triggered for more and more areas, which is going to affect more and more of you. So it'd be important to get ahead early and try to do everything you can. So that's the requirements from the San Diego Water Board's third-party general order. In the future, in the next round of the ag order, we are going to have to include these precedential requirements from the Eastern San Joaquin Agricultural Order. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to go over what those precedential requirements are so that you guys can be prepared for what's going to be required of you in the future. So essentially what happened was that the Central Valley, Eastern San Joaquin Valley, have this ag order that has a bunch of requirements for what the water board in the Central Valley is going to require from their members. And some of those requirements are precedential, which means that they're going to apply to all the regional boards, not just the Central Valley Regional Board, which means all of the members that are enrolled in the agricultural order in all regions are going to have to comply with these requirements in the future. So one of the requirements that we at the water board are going to have from this presidential requirement is outreach, which we're doing now, to make sure that we are communicating with the growers and with the third-party groups to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're helping each other out so that we all can work towards this common goal of, you know, having clean water and clean environment. For you guys, though, there's a lot of these, so it's going to take a second. But some of your requirements are the submission of management practices implementation. So what this essentially means is that you are going to have to submit what management practices you use. And this is grower specific, so it's not just something that the third party group submits, it's something that you as the individual grower have to do. But it's not just grower specific, it's also field level. So on your property, if you have different sections where you have different plants, then you're going to have to disclose what your management practices are for those specific fields. So if you have a plant that requires more water, for example, or more fertilizer compared to other plants on your property, you're going to have to disclose that field by field, like, well, this area of my property requires this kind of management, and then this area of my property requires this different type of management. For all of the properties that you manage, if you manage multiple ones. You also will have to start to implement sediment and erosion control practices if you do not already. And I will be going over some BMPs later that you can use for sediment and erosion control. You will also need to incorporate irrigation management elements into your nitrogen management. The Eastern San Joaquin Agricultural Order basically found that there is a link between irrigation management and nitrogen management, and that you can't completely like cover 100% nitrogen management without also including irrigation management. So what this basically means is that, like, for example, if you input your fertilizer into your irrigation water, then your nitrogen management is hand in hand with your irrigation management. What the Eastern San Joaquin Agricultural Order specifically is going to require is this Irrigation and Nutrient Management Plan, INMP. And I have a picture, which is a template of that worksheet over here to the right, and I will go over it in just a sec. So the Irrigation and Nutrient Management Plan identifies numeric targets and limits for groundwater. There's been a lot of focus on surface water, but we are going to be focusing a lot more on groundwater in the future. You guys don't recklessly discharge directly into a surface water body. So we're going to be focusing on groundwater in the future. Surface water, of course, is still going to be included. We just want to make sure that we're covering all our bases with groundwater too. And this is going to be phased in geographically by prioritized groundwater areas. So if you are in an area with shallow groundwater or with groundwater that is highly contaminated, then this is going to be phased in your area first versus the areas with, you know, deeper groundwater or cleaner groundwater. So I just want to go over this Irrigation and Nutrient Management Plan worksheet. It's like a template. I have the link down here if you want to see it more on your own. But I just want to go over like what's required on it so you can be prepared for what you're going to have to do. So you will need to check your irrigation method, whether you're using drip or micro, sprinkler, or anything else. It also will require you to do this pre-season planning for crop evapotranspiration, which is basically how much water is uptaken by your plants that you're watering. So once that in inches, like how many inches of water are being taken up by your plants. It also wants you to anticipate how many inches of water you're going to be using for your crop irrigation. And the nitrate as nitrogen concentration in your irrigation water. So that's what this NO3-N means. It's the concentration of nitrate as nitrogen in your irrigation water in either ppm or milligrams per liter. It also wants you to disclose your irrigation efficiency practices and your harvest information. So like how much you're expecting to harvest based on how much you plant versus how much you actually harvest. And then down here in nutrient management, wants you to identify your nutrient efficiency practices, whether that's using split fertilizer applications or testing your irrigation water for nitrogen or testing your soil, using cover crops, anything like that. It wants you to disclose. And then over here, numbers 9 through 14, I'm going to be going over this more on the next slide as well. But basically, it wants you to write down in pounds per acre on a yearly basis how much nitrogen is going to be available in the root zone of your soil. So based on how much fertilizer you're planning on using and the nitrogen concentration of that fertilizer, for example, putting how much you're planning on using in that year, and then writing down how much you actually used in that year. So how much fertilizer, if it has nitrogen in it, you actually used in pounds per acre. And it wants you to do that for your irrigation water as well, like how much nitrogen is in your irrigation water, how much you plan to put in there, and then how much you actually put in there. And it wants you to do that for any organic amendments you use, like manure, compost, or any dry or liquid fertilizer you use. So if you don't like inject fertilizer into your irrigation system, or maybe you like hand apply it on your topsoil or something, that would also be something you would have to disclose, like how much you plan on applying and then how much you actually apply in that year. And once you fill out this entire section, you can then put the total amount of nitrogen you planned on using in that year and then how much you actually used in that year. I know it's a lot. And there's still more. So some more requirements are that you will need to report out this nitrogen applied and nitrogen removed. So on an annual basis, on a multi-year annual basis, you will need to calculate your ratio of nitrogen applied to nitrogen removed by field. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have different sections on your agricultural operation where you have different plants, and for each of those sections, you will need to calculate how much nitrogen you apply to that section, and then how much nitrogen is removed from that section, like through evotranspiration or something. And this is anonymous, so you will do this calculation and submit it to your third-party group, and the third-party group will then give it to us. And by the time it gets to us, it will only have your third-party ID number next to it. So it's not being spread around to a bunch of different people with your information on it. And from all of the different members who are doing this, because it'll be a requirement, we'll be able to see the ratios for, say, a specific type of plant. If you have one type of plant in one area and you give us the ratio for that area of your property, and then a bunch of other properties and operations are also giving us their ratio for the same type of plant, we can then develop removal coefficients for that plant to make the calculations of how much nitrogen it removes go a lot easier. If there are any outliers, like say 50 facilities are coming back with similar A to R ratios for nitrogen for this specific plant, but then one facility has a very different number, then the third party group will follow up with that operation to try to figure out why they are coming up back with such a different value. Because this requires a lot of calculation, record keeping is going to be very important. You will need to know like how much fertilizer you use, what concentration of nitrogen is in that fertilizer. For instance, you'll need to know like how often you apply it, how often you irrigate, how much water you're irrigating with, all of that information. You will also need to monitor any on-site drinking water wells if you have them. So if you have any drinking water wells on site, you will also be required to monitor that well to make sure that the water quality is good and it's not being polluted with any of the runoff from your irrigation water, for example. It's also going to require groundwater trend monitoring. We spoke about the surface and groundwater monitoring program plan earlier. So this is just going to require more groundwater monitoring over time so we can see the trend analysis of if the groundwater is getting healthier or if it's getting worse, if it's getting polluted more. Now, I want to talk about something very important, and I'm sure that is something that's going to be of great interest to all of you, is that it is possible to get an exemption from the nitrogen management requirements. You have to meet 2 criteria in order to be able to get exempted from these nitrogen management requirements. And those 2 are that you have to prove that you do not discharge into surface water or groundwater. Those are the 2. You have to prove that you do not discharge into surface water or groundwater. You can do this either as an individual operation, or if you're in a specific area, you can also prepare a proposed exemption with a group of farmers in your area. And you basically have to show that there's no way, like it's impossible for any of your irrigation runoff to get into a surface water body. Whether that's because there's just no surface water body around you for the irrigation water to get into, or because you have engineered controls in place that redirect any irrigation runoff away from a surface water body. You also need to show that it is impossible for any of your irrigation water to penetrate into the ground and infiltrate into the groundwater. You have to show that the irrigation water, that none of the nutrients are going below the root zone of your soil, that all of the nutrients are basically being uptaken by the plants, and that none of them are penetrating deeper into the ground. If you can prove those 2 things, you can get an exemption from the nitrogen requirements and don't have to do this nitrogen applied, nitrogen removed reporting. But you have to prove that you meet those 2 requirements. So now I'm going to go over some best management practices that you can use to reduce your impact. and save you money. And there are also things you can use to potentially get you that exemption. So some of the BMPs you could use would be mulch or cover crops on bare soil. So you can see in this picture, you have the leafy greens here in rows, and between them you have like this grass. So what this does is that it's like a dual function. It helps with erosion and sediment control because the soil there isn't as loose because there's plants. So when water flows from your plants to another part of your property, it can't carry as much soil with it because the soil is being held in place by these grasses. So in that way, it acts as erosion and sediment control. But also what it does is that there's more plants in the area to act as evotranspiration for any of the nutrients you have in your soil. These plants could also uptake some of the nutrients from the fertilizer that are coming off and not being used by the plants that you're actually growing. So it can help reduce the amount of nutrients in the root zone as well. You can also, for sediment and erosion control, you can use berms and wattles around like stockpiles for when it rains. The water can flow through the berms and the wattles, but the soil can't pass through it. You can also put these around like culverts if you have them, or drains. That way, when the water is flowing towards the drain, the water can pass through, but the sediment can't. Another thing you can do is irrigate loose soil, especially if you have like hilly areas on your property. If you just water that soil, it'll make it heavier, and so it can't travel as easily, and therefore you will have less erosion and sediment. You can also put barriers or buffers between growing areas and any ditches or creeks, ponds, lakes, or wetlands that you might have near or in your property. So these barriers and buffers can be many things, but the specific examples that I have are vegetated buffer strips, gas line channels, grass swales, things of that nature. For the same reason as using the cover crops, if it's vegetated or made with grass, the vegetation and grass can not only act as a barrier to stop the water from flowing into a surface water body, for example, but it can also uptake some of the nutrients in that water and prevent the nutrients from going below the root zone. Also help you out with that exemption potentially. Some more BMPs. I would highly recommend auditing your irrigation system, especially with this irrigation management system coming up. That way you can know how much water you're using, how efficient your irrigation system is. Maybe a different irrigation system would work better. It would be able to save you water. You want to make sure the water is going exactly where you want it to go and nowhere else. Water is expensive. You know, you don't want to be wasting it. So auditing your system to try to get a more efficient one would be very useful to you. You can also dig lined trenches around your plant groups to capture runoff. So if you have different areas where you grow plants, if you surround those areas with little trenches that can capture your irrigation runoff, that's one way to keep it out of surface water. But if it's unlined, then that nutrient-rich water could just potentially go straight through to the ground and infiltrate the groundwater. And as soon as it does that, you're no longer eligible for that exemption. But if you line the trenches instead, that will prevent the water from being able to get into the soil. So then you don't have to worry about those nutrients going below the root zone. You can also have a lined retention basin constructed on your property, and that's what you see in this picture here. The retention basins are basically bigger versions of these trenches where you can have all of your irrigation runoff sent to this basin, and if it's lined, it can't infiltrate the groundwater, and if it's designed properly, it won't overflow, so then you don't have to worry about your irrigation water getting into the surface water body either. You could also potentially reuse the captured water, which is really helpful because, like I said, water is expensive. If you are able to reuse some of it, it will help you out in the long run. Another thing that I would make sure that you guys do is add secondary containment around your chemical storage, like any chemicals you have. Because even if you're doing everything right with your irrigation and your nutrient management, if like it rains and the water flows right through your chemicals and carries those chemicals to a surface water body, then you're no longer eligible for that exemption. So just making sure that you have all your secondary containment up off the ground, covered up in a secondary containment, That way, if it rains or if it spills or if anything, you can make sure that none of those chemicals are getting into the water. So those are just some of the things that you can do. Like I said, the San Diego Regional Irrigated Lands Group sent out a BMP packet to everyone, not just the 554 members affected by the WQRP. So you can read that, and it has so many more BMPs in it that you can look at and potentially use depending on what's best for your operation. So that's the end of our presentation today. I just want to thank you guys so much for all your help in protecting our environment. I know that you guys do so much, and I know that you care about it so much more than so many of the other people around, because it's your livelihood and you care about it and you take care of it. And I really want to make sure that you feel appreciated for the work that you do, because I really appreciate it. And we at the Water Board really appreciate it. And I don't want you guys to feel in any way persecuted by, you know, anyone or the government or anything. We really appreciate what you do, and we know that you want the best for our environment. I have some references here. These references are just links that you can use if you want to read more about any of the information that I went over, such as the laws I talked about, or the water quality objectives. If you want to go to that table and find the water quality objectives for your specific hydrologic area, you can follow this link here, this one in the middle. If you want to read more about the discharge prohibitions and specifications, you can go to the ag order. Here's a link of it here. And then I also have links to the presidential order requirements. So if you want to read more about what those requirements are, the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board prepared this document that just covers the requirements that apply to the other regions. So you don't have to dig through the entire Eastern San Joaquin agricultural order to find them. And then I also have a link here for the California Environmental Data Exchange Network, otherwise known as CEDN. CEDN has a lot of the monitoring data that is done. So if you guys want to know how to access that website and look at the monitoring that's being done in your area, just let me know and I can run through it with you guys. But yeah, that's everything that I have. So if you have any questions, I can take them now. Thank you so much.
We have a few questions from the chat if you'd like to address those.
Guess I'll just end slideshow. And stop sharing. Recapture tanks allowed. That's from Hans. I'm not gonna be able to pronounce your last name correctly. I'm so sorry. Harry Bome. Yeah, I don't see why recapture tanks wouldn't be allowed as long as you know, they're designed properly. So
there was a question, are there formulas or tables that growers can reference to fill out the pre-season planning info in the event they don't track the data for crop evapotranspiration, etc.? And then the same question for on-site drinking water wells and groundwater trend monitoring.
Okay, are those questions in the chat? Because I'm not seeing them.
Yeah, it was that was directly to me.
Oh, okay, I see.
I can send it to you if you'd like.
Yeah. I don't currently know of any formulas, but I do imagine that there are some that are being prepared by maybe other water boards. I don't know if Ben can speak more to that, but yeah.
I think thanks, Kaylin. I think this is Ben Neal from the San Diego Water Board. Hi, everybody. Yeah, the UC Cooperative Extension is also working on those types of formulas for certain plant types and crop types.
All right. So the next question I see is from Frank Woolham. Where can I get a copy of the red zone map? I believe you're talking about the water quality restoration plan map with the red on it. So that was prepared by the San Diego Region Irrigated Lands Group. So they can provide you a copy with it, or I can as well, because I also have a copy. And it includes several different maps for the different areas where there have been water quality benchmark exceedances, and it shows all of the members in red. So yeah, you can either get it from them or get it from me. Is your PowerPoint slides available? Yeah, I believe the third party group was going to post them somewhere. But I do have them. So if the third party group, if the San Diego group doesn't post them somewhere, I can also send them to you directly if you want.
We can almost certainly attach those when we upload the video to our
Okay.
site. That shouldn't be a problem.
Cool. I will send you the PowerPoint right after the presentation then. Oh, and then I see other formulas or tables that growers can fill out in the event they don't track data. So yeah, as Ben said, that's all the questions that I see in here. Does anyone have any other questions? That or no?
If anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask. You can unmute yourself and ask, or put them into the chat. Oh, here you go. When do you anticipate precedential rules going into effect in San Diego County?
Well, they'll go into effect with the next ag order that we do. And I know that's coming up soon. So within the next year or two, it's going to apply.
This is Greg, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So when you're talking about trying to guarantee that no fertilizer or anything is leaving your property, does that include stormwater?
Yeah, I think if the stormwater can carry any of the fertilizer or any of the nutrients off your property, then that would also be something that you would want to make sure isn't happening. So it's not just
It's
irrigation.
going to be pretty impossible to do.
Yeah, I understand it'd be difficult. But the goal is to reduce the amount of nutrients that are getting off site. So if they're getting off site in irrigation water or stormwater, it's going to be a concern either way.
Right, but like, for me too, I get a ton of runoff piled up me from neighboring operations. There's no way I can contain all of that.
Right, yeah, I've been to your property, yeah, so I know what you're talking about. That would be something that we would have to work with you, I think, individually on.
Everything is, you've also been to my property, so who am I going to get help from to be able to figure out all the calculations for all the different crops that I grow from 2-inch to 40-inch boxes of 1,000 different varieties?
I think that goes with what Ben was saying about like the UC cooperative extensions, making those tables. The water boards are going to be helping the third-party groups. But maybe Ben can speak more to it, but that's something that we're just going to have to think about in the future.
Yeah, all of those types of resources are going to have to be developed to help people follow this precedential court order from the Central Valley. And in San Diego, we have a huge variety of crops that are grown. We do not have a monoculture where you see miles of the same crop going on forever. So there is an expectation that there will be crops where we won't have those formulas for, where we won't have the data for, and we will have to work with the best information that we have at the time.
Okay, well, I just hope that everybody realizes that, because I'm certainly not the only one in that position.
Okay, thank you.
We have one more question. Is there a site or a source that gives us guidance on the exemption for nitrogen management?
I'm not aware of any. I know in San Diego, since we're not implementing it yet, I don't think there is anything. I don't know if any of the other regions already have something like this in place, but I can look into it for sure to see if it exists anywhere. Like I said, you have to meet those 2 requirements and you have to prove it. So I think that link I have that will send you to the document prepared by the Central Coast Regional Water Board. It has some more information, so that might be able to help a little bit with trying to figure out the specific requirements for the exemption or the guidance for it, but I just don't know if there's any specific guidance, like a specific document for that. Milton asked any links to the worksheet. Yes, on the slide 9, where the worksheet picture is, in the bottom right-hand corner is a link directly to the worksheet. So once the slides are online, you can follow that link. I can put it in the chat right now too, so that you can see it and go to it. Hope it works. That's the link I used.
Do you have the full URL for that?
Yeah, I'm going to it right now. Here we go. So here's the URL.
There you go.
All right.
Any other questions out there? All right. We'll
Let's
wrap
see
it
now.
up then.
Oh, I see one new message. Oh, it's just thanks.
There's a
Yeah,
second
thank you, Frank. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kaylin. We appreciate the presentation. I hope that gives everyone kind of a good overview of why the water board exists and why the Irrigated Lands Group exists as a result. And we look forward to seeing everyone at the next meeting, or the next webinar, excuse me.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to have had this opportunity to speak in front of you. I hope my presentation was helpful. If you have any questions in the future, you can just email me or call me. My email is my name, kaylin.smith@waterboards.ca.gov. So you can email me any questions you have. You can also call me. My phone number is 619-521-3380 if you have any questions or if you want to talk about anything. If you want to schedule an inspection of your property, maybe. I'm free to talk and answer your questions. So thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaylin.
Brandon, should I send my presentation to you or to Tasha, to Hannah, all three?
Tasha or Hannah will be just fine.
Okay.
They'll be able to get it over to our webmaster so it can all get uploaded when we edit the video and upload that.
Okay.
Okay, and there's your contact information from Ben. I'll save that and we'll include that. All right, I'm going to go stop the recording and we'll stop all of this as well.